Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight here on Facebook Live. We're excited to be here with Michael Dean. My name is Mark Cruver. I'm the owner of Capstone Educational Consultants, and we're excited to be here tonight. This is the second in a series of college journey conversations that we're going to be having over the course of the next month and a half. And let me introduce to you with us tonight, talking about staying on track and talking about the standardized testing. Michael Dean. Michael Dean is with Summit Educational Group. Michael, introduce yourself.
Mark, thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for having me tonight. My name is Michael Dean. I am the executive director at Summit Educational Group. We are a one-on-one in-home test prep and tutoring company located in the Northeast. We have offices just outside of Boston and Southern Connecticut, Westchester, New York. So we are definitely kind of right in the eye of the storm, so to speak. We're going through it. And we've had a lot of interesting things happening in our neck of the woods that has an impact on testing. I've been with Summit since 2006. So while I've been there a long time, I see a lot of things. This is definitely an interesting time, kind of an unprecedented time for me in the world of testing, as it is, I'm sure, for all of you in your day-to-day lives. So thanks for having me, Mark.
Oh, it's my pleasure to have you here and an honor to have you. I think that there are a lot of questions out there that are central to kind of what's happening on the standardized testing front as it relates to the cancellations with SAT, as we all know, and the cancellations with ACT, as we all know, and what that looks like moving forward, and what kind of decisions both College Board and ACT are actually what we might think they're going to be making here in the future, and kind of how can we predict those things, and how can we tell our students and share with people and families about what to anticipate moving forward. There are a lot of decisions, and a lot of students, as you very well know, Michael, are anxious about testing. They're anxious about this upcoming school year for college, and wondering even whether or not it's going to exist for that matter, which is another topic altogether. But even those in the class of 2021 are concerned about kind of what things look like with regards to their testing schedule. Mm-hmm. Many of them had a plan. Many of them had it established, and they knew where they were headed and when they were going to take the test and how they were going to prepare for it. And all that got knocked out from underneath them. And now they're having to kind of rethink what that looks like again. I think there's good news there. I think there's hope in all of that. And I think that there's much to kind of expect that is good. Mm-hmm. But it's almost like, we're in the tall weeds trying to find our way to the other side of the prairie. So, let's have a little conversation about that. And how do you see that kind of playing out right now?
Well, there's still, as you say, we're in the weeds, we're in the tall grass. There's so much that we don't know. Here's what we do know, and might be helpful to kind of back up a little bit so that we can move forward. This, as it relates to testing, this thing really kind of all started happening, just for us anyway, a few days before that March SAT. And that was kind of the worst confluence of events. We had test site cancellations in the Northeast getting canceled every hour, every minute of the hour. It was creating a lot of anxiety. And then, from there, once we kind of got a clear sense that, okay, this is, the gravity of the situation that we were all dealing with, it became a foregone conclusion that the April ACT would be canceled. And sure enough, it was. And then, as expected, the March makeup date, the March 28th makeup date that College Board had put out there had been canceled. And that May SAT has been canceled. That was kind of the latest domino to fall. It was not a surprise to any of us. So now we're in an interesting situation where we're looking forward and we're doing our best to try to figure out what the heck is coming. The next test on the calendar is that June ACT, and then followed closely behind by the July ACT. So ACT is really kind of next up on the clock. And the big question is what's going to happen to those test dates. I'm talking to parents every day, as Mark, I'm sure you are. This is really on folks' minds. What's going to happen with July? And the answer is we don't know. We just don't know what's going to happen, but we do know a little bit more about what ACT is thinking. And I think that's helpful. If we kind of know what they're thinking and what their strategy is, it can give us some sense of where this thing might go. Now, what seems to be happening, and I think this is pretty clear from conversations we've had with ACT and public statements that they've put out, is they're taking a more regional approach to this June ACT. I think they understand that June ACT is not going to happen at every part of the country. For example, here in the Northeast, we have students, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. It is quite frankly pretty difficult for us to conceive of that June ACT happening. We're optimistic, but we're realistic as well. I have more optimism that June ACT can happen in other parts of the country, perhaps Georgia, that has already started to take steps towards reopening, and their timeline, I think, may be a little bit more ahead. But ACT is taking the stance that, look, the best people to make the decisions about whether this test can happen and whether it's safe to do so are probably the local and state governments, or maybe the school officials themselves, as to whether they feel comfortable or whether they're set up to do that. So I think we're going to see the June ACT happen in some places.
Okay, so what it sounds like you're saying, Michael, and let me kind of hop in here for this, because I think it's really relevant. It sounds as though from your description that even though the state may allow the testing to occur and to take place, pick the state, it doesn't matter which one it is, right?
Exactly.
So
right.
Even the state allows that the test may occur, that the testing site may decline hosting it. So what happens if your local area and the testing site in your local area declines to host because of concerns maybe specifically in that community?
Yeah, this is really a great question and really relevant. Actually, just this morning, one of our families in Rhode Island was all set to go for the June ACT locally. They received an email from ACT letting them know that their test site had been canceled and that they were being moved to an alternate test site just across the state border in Connecticut, a local test site. So again, what ACT is clearly doing, and I'm glad that they have been proactive in their communication. Clearly, that particular school did not feel comfortable. They wanted to proactively let their community know that they were not going to be open. And ACT has made alternate arrangements for them. So I think that as we kind of go region by region, community by community, you're going to start to see this, where individual communities will start to make decisions about whether they feel comfortable or not. If they don't feel comfortable, it does seem like students can expect to receive notification. And, the hope is that ACT continues to be as proactive as they have been. The kind of worst case scenario here is we have a repeat of that March SAT where it becomes down to the wire. I'm optimistic that that won't happen, because I think both testing agencies have kind of learned from that experience.
So what you're saying is if they do if they cancel a site, for instance, then it sounds like ACT will notify the family or the student based on their registration for that site administration and give them alternatives.
If they can. I know that ACT is trying like heck to add as many test sites as they can for June and July, really in an opportunity to try to preserve as much testing as they can for students, to give them a chance to test this spring, because it has been so disruptive to students' testing plans. So they're going to try, it sounds like, to do everything they can to make alternate arrangements. It may be that folks have to drive a little bit to get to their end destination, but it certainly does seem like ACT is going to make all necessary arrangements to get people into whatever test site they can, if they can.
Well, that'll be fantastic, moving forward, and answer a lot of concerns and provide a little bit of relief to the anxiety that many of the students and families are having about that June test. So hopefully that happens, and
right.
to see that.
Yeah, I'm more optimistic now that we've kind of seen that proactive communication. It certainly does seem like ACT is aware of the timeline on this and how important it is to be proactive and let people know. So one way or the other, I feel good that that communication is going to be disseminated to students and families as early as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, we certainly are thankful that any of those out there that are listeners are joining us tonight. And if you are listening to us now and you have any questions, feel free to type those into the comment section, and we'll take those questions and field them as we move along. But we would love to hear from any of our listeners to share in the conversation, because this is a conversation for you. So here we have this test, Michael, both of these tests for that matter. Mm-hmm. SAT has added a testing in September that they don't typically have.
No.
And so now they have one for every month starting in August through December, which is pretty great. But they've also kind of hinted at the fact that they might be attempting or maybe even administering an online version of this test. There's been a lot of talk about this online version in the homes, in your home, and the regulation on how a student would take that test is still very much in question. There's been some concerns about accessibility and fairness in that test taking. And I know for a fact that, even today, Claremont McKinnon College was the first in California.
That's right.
Was the first college to make it very clear that they were not going to be accepting any online version of this, of the SAT. Mm-hmm. And that could spark a little bit of a trend where, we're all still kind of sitting back and waiting to see kind of what that announcement does, because oftentimes it only takes one
right.
before the dominoes start.
And it spreads, yeah.
Because they have a concern, it makes others think, well, maybe I should have a concern too, and,
right.
and a little bit deeper into it. So we're not sure if the online version is actually going to take place this fall, but there will be opportunities for the administration as we know it, in terms of in a seat at a site. What are your thoughts on that online version, and what are your thoughts moving forward with that, and the likelihood of that kind of being administered?
Yeah, well, I think it's anyone's guess as to whether it can happen or whether it does happen. But what the SAT has done, they've obviously canceled their May and June administrations of the SAT. They've added that September 26th date. What they have said is they're going to give priority registration to students who are shut out of spring testing. So the week of May 26th, they're going to be letting families know, hey, registration for August, September, October is open. You can go ahead and get a front row seat to sign up for those. And I think there's some optimism that at least some of those tests can happen as we return in the fall. I think there's optimism that schools can reopen in some form or another. It does seem to be the trend line. Of course, none of us really know. Now, what the SAT, the College Board, has done as kind of a hedge is they've come out and said, if a test is canceled, we will offer an online in-home version of the SAT. It's clear that it's not their preferred option. This is really a backup plan in the event that a test administration gets canceled. I think many of us who've been watching the news have maybe heard different warnings about a recurrence of COVID-19 pandemic in the fall. Perhaps it's going to come back when school reopens. Perhaps it's going to come back with colder weather. Of course, we've heard counter arguments to that as well. We don't really know. So what College Board is saying is, look, we're going to try to have this backup plan in place in case you need it. I think they recognize all of the questions around equity, fairness, security that we all have. And those are real important questions. It's too early to predict whether this thing will happen. I think I'm of two minds about it, to be honest with you. For a lot of the families that we work with, the experience of being shut out of March, May, June testing was really difficult for them. And so the experience possibly of getting shut out of another testing opportunity in the fall would be really demoralizing, especially as they progress through their junior or senior year. So College Board is trying to do everything they can. And I think it's a good faith effort by College Board, frankly, to try to provide options for people. But it certainly does raise questions. And I think it's hard for me to believe that Claremont McKenna is going to be the only one coming out and making a public stance about this. So it'll be really interesting to see. But those options are going to be available if they're needed. ACT, on the other hand, is taking a similar but slightly different approach to online testing. Now, they made waves last fall when they came out. They made two announcements. Number one was an announcement that they were kind of moving off of their longstanding stance to not superscore the ACT. They came out and said, we have data that tells us that superscoring the ACT is a valid thing to do. And then the second major announcement that they made last September was, as of September 2020, so this coming September, they were going to be offering online section retesting for students who had already taken spring administrations of the test. And that's still in effect. We've talked to ACT. They're still committed to online section retesting in September. That's going to be happening. It's not going to be a backup plan or a fallback plan. It's going to be a valid option, but it's only going to be an option for students who have already taken a test administration. So in pencil and paper. So there's yet another reason, another indication as to why the ACT is so committed to trying to make spring testing happen, because students will need to have that spring administration on file in order to take advantage of it. It's a new frontier as far as testing is concerned. We've known for a long time that ACT and College Board have wanted to move into the online space. You can see the appeals to this kind of thing. For better or worse, I think we're all kind of getting forced into it. It's an open question as to how this is going to go. I do imagine there will be some bumps in the road as we kind of get into it.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting journey, and there's so many moving parts, right? And everybody's trying to kind of get a hold of all of them to find out exactly what's happening. So I applaud you for being able to articulate for us your perspective on that. That's incredible for us.
Well, I'm certainly happy to do it. Although I imagine if I come back in a week and we have another conversation, my perspective might have changed 7 times as the ground has shifted on so many of us. It's just, this is all uncharted territory. I mean, as I say, I've been with Summit for 14 years. We've been through recessions. We've been through different things. This is unlike anything, and it just the magnitude of it and how it's affected every kind of facet of people's lives. It's not just college, it's not just testing, but it certainly is a part of it. It's really, there's so many unknowns. I think, and this is something that you and I were talking about earlier, that's just really important. We're talking about test dates getting canceled. We're talking about the unknown about what's going to happen with the next test date in June, July, what's going to happen with my preferred test site for June, July. What's going to happen with online testing and fall schooling as we get into the fall. What sometimes can be lost in all that is the fact that colleges have come out en masse really and said, we are moving to test optional, even on like a temporary basis. And what that has done, and again, I think it's a good faith effort. Everybody involved in standardized testing and college admissions seems to be making a true good faith effort to help students through this difficult time. But what I think can be lost in all of the shuffling and all of the ground moving beneath our feet is the fact that with so many schools going test optional, it actually does provide more choice, more flexibility, and more ownership over the process for high school students, at least in this year. The thing that we kind of have been saying to folks is you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. We, like you and like a lot of testing companies, we are really big on helping families come up with testing plans. So knowing which tests you're going to prepare for. Is it going to be SAT? Is it going to be ACT? When are you going to take that test, and how are you going to prepare for it? Those are kind of the three main questions. It's been difficult as testing has been canceled and plans have had to change. But what we're telling folks is, look, you will get a chance to test. We don't exactly know when it's going to be. We hope for ACT it's the spring. We think it's going to be the fall for SAT. You will get a chance to test. And in many cases, you're going to get a chance to test more than once. Go ahead and take that test. Stick with your plan. Don't give up on it. Don't waffle and try to go to ACT or SAT just because there are different test options that are available. Stick with your plan. Stick with the test that you're most comfortable with. And then go in and prep for it and give it your best. And if you come out with scores that are reflective of your true ability level and that support your college application, well, then you go ahead and send those scores and you feel great about it. On the other hand, if your scores are not reflective of your true ability level, or you don't feel like they provide ample support for your college application, guess what? You don't have to send them. The choice is yours. And, we've been asked by many parents and students, okay, well, if I don't send the scores, are colleges going to look askance at that? Are they going to mentally deduct points from my application just because standardized testing is not included? And from everyone we've talked to on the college side, the answer is absolutely not. This year, everybody recognizes the unprecedented nature of what we're dealing with, and colleges really are not going to be penalizing students for not submitting scores. So the power is really in students' hands. I think if we can kind of shift perspective on it and look at it as kind of a glass half full, it really does provide a nice opportunity for families.
It's interesting that you say all of that, because so many colleges have made the shift during this particular debacle, is kind of what I call it. But they've made this shift to go test optional. And in fact, I think the numbers that are now reported, not all of these have changed just within the spring. But right now there's over 1,100 accredited four-year colleges and universities that have some kind of test optional policy right now. That's a lot of schools, when you look at greater numbers. And like you said, that opens the doors, opens the windows, right? It opens a lot of opportunity for students that may not have had the opportunities otherwise to sort of, take advantage of that opportunity and maybe explore options and explore colleges even that maybe weren't on the list before or weren't in consideration before, that may be now. In fact, I also found today that there are several, and I mean more than several, colleges right now for the 2020 admissions. Now they've announced that it's only for the 2020 admissions, that they are now temporarily waiving the ACT or SAT requirements for 2020 students only. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a few of them. I was looking through the list, and at least for Georgia, I know that Emmanuel College is on that list for Georgia. There's also, and I'm kind of scanning through it live here, but also the entire university system of Georgia is on that list, with the exception of Georgia Tech and UGA. Right. So there's quite a few colleges, and that's just a couple of the greater number that has been put on that list, that's going to waive that need for this semester, this upcoming semester. And that's huge for our seniors right now, who feel like, they got their legs kicked out from underneath them.
Right. No, it is. I mean, there's so much in what's happening right now that students feel like is out of their control. Yeah. And I feel, I walk around my neighborhood and I see the different signs that say a senior lives here, And you feel for those kids who are not going to be able to graduate with their friends. You feel for the kids who are not going to go through that rite of passage, and it's going to be so different for them. So there's so much that's happening that I think students feel like is out of their control, and there's so much loss that's happening in that. But here is one thing that actually gives them more control and more ownership. And I think we're doing a good service for families to point that out, and to point out that, with a slight change of perspective, this can be seen for what it is, which is a positive for this incoming class. I think it's great that so many colleges have come out kind of proactively. They don't have to do this. Many of those seniors have already tested, and they've waived it. And we're seeing this wave for the next class, our current group, 2021, that is saying, hey, we're going to be waiving this. We're waiving it for next year or 2 years down the road, or we're going to be doing a pilot and then reevaluating it. That is a good thing, and it's showing that colleges really are understanding about the process.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there's many of them are making this a policy for a year, like for the 2021 students that are going to be coming in, and they're going to waive it for the year. But then others are going to waive it for the year and just kind of evaluate it and see how that plays out.
Right.
I was on an interview with UGA, Georgia Tech, and Georgia State, and they were talking about how things relative to these times, there's no data to be able to kind of like reflect on and say and help make decisions moving forward as institutions. And even in my own days of admissions, when I was in admissions, you reflected back on historical data to help kind of make changes and make admission decisions moving forward. And this particular issue is going to change that. So these colleges are like making these waivers, maybe for a year. Mm-hmm. Some of them have mentioned that they're going to do it for a couple years because there's going to be a little wave that's going to come through. And of course, many of them are saying we're going to do it for 3 years. Yeah. Well, what tends to happen is that there's always this, when colleges and universities adopt things like this, these type of these waivers and these experiments, if you will, these policies they kind of stick.
It's hard to go back on them, right? Because there are so many. They're popular in many cases. Test optional is popular, and it should be. And it's understandable why it is. And so, the longer the period of evaluation goes on, the more institutionalized this becomes. I think the more comfortable an institution is with this notion of test optional. I think you're going to have schools that were reluctant, maybe wanted to make this choice or were considering it, but were reluctant to do so because it was such a sea change. They've been forced into it, but this is an opportunity for them to evaluate the data. Some schools will likely go back to test requirements. Many schools will stay, as you pointed out. And I just think the schools, whichever way they go, they can probably feel pretty confident that they're making the right choice based on the data that they have.
Yeah. Now we've kind of thrown around some terminology that I think might need some discussion. And so let's pause for a moment for our viewers, because I think it would be really advantageous for them to understand more clearly what these terms mean. And these terms we've kind of thrown around are test optional, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? But we've also mentioned test blind. Mm-hmm. You're going to hear colleges that are test blind in the process. And then we've also, we're going to learn, if we haven't spoken already, about test flexible. Mm-hmm. And that can get a little confusing when you're kind of like throwing those three terms around on what they mean. So let's start with test blind. Michael, tell us a real easy understanding of what that might mean.
Yeah, the way I think about test blind is we don't want your tests. Go ahead and send them. We're not going to look at them. And right here in my backyard in Massachusetts, the example I always use, is probably not a great example anymore, was Hampshire College. If you know anything about Hampshire, it's a very special school. It's for entrepreneurs. It's not non-traditional. Students they design their own curriculum, and Hampshire for a long time, of course, it's struggling now financially, but for a long time, they said testing really has no place in our curriculum. It's really kind of who you are and what you know, and how creative you can be. So they were very much test blind, and they'd say, look, go ahead and send them, but we're not going to look at them. That's the way I consider a test blind. And historically, very few colleges have kind of gone to that extreme to say, we're not even passing that around the admissions table. So that's the way I kind of describe it.
Yeah. So those scores in college admissions offices where they are test blind, admissions offices are really not looking at the scores for admissions purposes.
Right. That's correct.
The
Yeah.
admissions decisions are not determined with the knowledge of that score in mind. But it could be used for other things. So they might want to have a score submitted, but they may be blind to it for admissions, but they're not going to be so blind to it in some cases for perhaps placement or merit aid, for instance. Yep. So they may use it for those, but for admissions, that's where the blindness is for those that are test blind.
Yeah, I think, that's a great point that you pointed out, the merit aid, because that's the one that we talk about a lot. We're talking about test optional, and I think test optional really kind of captures the bulk of the schools that have kind of been making announcements. And sometimes the press that you hear about test optional doesn't always match the reality of what the institution is doing what they mean when they say, we're going test optional. So what does test optional mean? Test optional means just kind of what it sounds, is you have the option of sending that score or not. And it's really up to you. You're not going to be penalized by the institution if you send it. You're not going to be penalized if you don't send it. That choice is up to you. And again, we're talking about admissions decisions that are being made. We always put that caveat in there because you're absolutely right to point out merit aid. Many schools very much do look at standardized testing for merit aid decisions. And I think that's really important for parents to know that. And it's really important for why we continue to help parents and students come up with testing plans. And we say, hey, testing does have a place, because while it may not necessarily be a requirement for the admissions, it may be something that you need to get into a particular school within the college or these merit aid decisions.
Right. And so, deciding, especially during this time when testing sites have been canceled and actual test administrations have been canceled, the anxiety of, I've got to take a test, I've got to get this test, and my whole world's going to come to an end if it doesn't, is not so required anymore with those that are test blind and test optional, as we've discussed.
Right. Yeah, I think one example that I kind of point to is Cornell. We've been talking a little bit about Cornell, and the headline of their press release said that they're moving to test optional. If you kind of look at the press release, it clarifies it a little bit more. And it goes on to say, we recognize that not every student is going to get an opportunity to test multiple times. And, what you kind of take away from it, I don't have the exact wording off the top of my head, but what you kind of take away from it is testing still has a part in the Cornell process. It's just that it's not a requirement of admission. So again, I think that can be sometimes confusing. Do I send it? Do I not send it? How do I know? But if we look at it the other way, the real thought process is, if that score is reflective of who you are, it shows you in a good light, it supports your application, that's when you send it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. The third term that we were kind of floating around was test flexible. Test blind, test optional, and now we have test flexible. So So how do we go about describing what text flexible is?
The way that I kind of look at test flexible for admissions is that students have the ability to send different types of tests to support their application. SAT, ACT, IB, AP, subject tests, school-based testing. There's kind of a whole different menu of things. And again, the idea here is you have more choice, you have more options, you have the ability to send the scores, to send the tests that you think support your application. And what Test Flexible seems to do is just kind of widen the scope of the different types of tests that are available for students to send.
Right. Excellent. I think that helps us understand a little bit better, and I hopefully our listeners can understand just a little bit better when they're doing their own homework about whether or not a college is test blind or optional or flexible, what that now means and how to move forward and be confident in this, and whether or not they submit that score and for what reason they submit their score. It's all about creating a plan. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
When students and families come to Capstone Educational Consultants for determining what that best testing strategy is for them, right. We sit down and talk with them and establish what is best in light of their pursuit and their journey. And we kind of back the truck up and lead them to that test that they're wanting to take through prep, and in hopes that that'll accomplish a goal that they have in mind of submitting the best possible version of who they are on a test.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you guys do the same thing.
We do. Our process is very similar, and I think one thing that I'd like to point out is how do you know when your standardized test score is actually supportive? I've been talking about if it supports your application, if it is revealing of your true ability level. How do you know, right? And some folks might have that question, like, okay, my score is this. Is that good? Is that bad?
Right.
I think the first thing to understand is that you don't need a 1600 on the SAT or a 36 in the ACT in order to have your scores be supportive of your application. So much about standardized testing is that these tests are not really designed for everybody to get a perfect score. If you did, it would kind of fail the design purpose of the test, which is to separate students along the scoring continuum for admissions purposes. What you really want to do during that planning phase, when you're looking at which test to take, when to take it, how do I prep, it's really important to get a baseline for yourself. We have students come in before we even have conversations about SAT versus ACT. We're asking students to sit down, take a full-length SAT, take a full-length ACT. We really believe that's kind of the best measuring stick. We compare and contrast. And we say, okay, on day one, without any prep, so this is a valid score, here's where you are with ACT, here's where you are with SAT. And then that opens up the conversation to all kinds of interesting things like, okay, which one did you score better on? Which one do you have more opportunity for score improvement on? Which one did you like the most, right? And so we kind of triangulate through that information which test a student should take. And that's how students, as they progress, they kind of measure their improvement throughout the program back to their starting score. Like, okay, I started with a 26, now I'm at a 31, right? I feel really good about that 31 because I know where I started from. Whereas if I started from a 26, I go and I take that test on test day, I have a bad test, I'm stressed out, I got a 25, I got a 27, I might look at that test and say, I'm not going to submit that to a score. So having that plan in place, having those diagnostic testing and that starting score is so powerful. And I also think, not to get too far afield of it, but we're talking about, okay, the ACT has June and July administrations. We think July can happen. We're not so sure about June everywhere, but certainly the next test in line is ACT. You got to wait a little bit longer, all the way to August, September for SAT. I'm having a lot of parents email me or call me and they're saying, hey, do you think this June test is going to happen? I know we were preparing for the May SAT, but maybe we should jump ship now instead of waiting to August. Maybe we should jump ship to ACT. And that's where having that plan can be really powerful, where I say, okay, look, let's go back to our starting score. Remember when your son or daughter kind of took those tests and we decided we were going to be this test over the other for these really good reasons? Either they didn't score well on one test, or they really didn't respond well to it. We made an educated decision. Now is not really the time to jump ship to one test or another unless there's a compelling reason to do so. So that's kind of where that plan can be really helpful for parents and students as things kind of shift.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'd also add to that, Michael, that, in the event that a student really wanted to jump ship to ACT because we have an earlier opportunity, and
Yep.
a couple of them at that,
Mhm.
before we even hit the August. A great possible strategy for them, because you just have those students that they got to get it done. They
Yep.
gotta get it written off.
Their timeline is different, right?
A great strategy for them perhaps would be to come in and take a full-length practice test on the
That's right.
ACT.
That's right.
Take a full-length practice test. The great thing about here at Capstone, and I think at Summit as well, is that the turnaround on a score report for that practice test is like almost virtually instant in comparison to an actual score.
Mhm.
So we can get a great read and a great baseline on where your ACT is versus where maybe that earlier conversation that we had decided to move towards SAT, and we had a baseline back when we were making that strategic move to head towards SAT. But now we can compare those results to a new administered practice ACT and begin to develop a prep strategy or a coaching strategy with a specialist that can move you in the direction and preparation for June and July. And that's a potential strategy that some students could potentially do if they're wanting to jump from SAT onto ACT.
And that is really the kind of the power of the practice test, because it gives you firsthand, real-time knowledge about how you're performing on a test and whether this test kind of plays to your strengths. There are some key differences between SAT and ACT and kind of how they go about structuring questions and things like that. Time per question is all very different. So some students might respond really well to one or another, and you don't always know which one they're going to respond best to until they get in there and they actually try it out. When everything kind of changed on us in March, it was really important for us. We had to shift. Of course, we do in-home tutoring. That's been our method of doing tutoring. We had to shift overnight to online. We were really fortunate that we kind of had the infrastructure to be able to do online in-home tutoring. All of our practice tests have shifted to online as well. So any weekend throughout the year, families anywhere can sign up for a free practice SAT. Every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we're running those, not so much as a plug, but just as a kind of an opportunity for students to keep testing, keep up with their plans. And you're absolutely right. If you're thinking about shifting from SAT to ACT because you think ACT might happen sooner, the best thing to do is to take a practice test and to really know where you stand.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the full length practice test.
Yeah.
Front to back. Here at Capstone, we do them in person.
Yeah.
We're still doing that. We haven't gone to an online version yet of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to begin doing that in limited numbers, for obvious reasons.
Right.
And it's so important to go from beginning to end and we do it on a Saturday morning at an 8:45 time slot in the morning to run through noon to get that same experience, because it's going to be the same breaks. It's going to be the same descriptions. You're going to have to remove the same items from your desk at the same exact time as you would during a normal test. and you're going to have a break when you're supposed to have a break. For the length of time breaks are supposed to be given. So all of the entire experience is just as it would be. So in a real test administration. Yeah. So that's super important because you begin to compare apples to apples with regards to your results, and the timing and your testing experience is not impacting your score negatively or positively to cause the skew. So we want to keep the playing field even on that.
Yeah, you're so right about the testing experience. I think one of the sad things about having to move to online is you don't have that in-person experience. There's nothing, I call it a dress rehearsal or a scrimmage for the real thing. You go in, there's nothing like that experience of going into a classroom, sitting down with your fellow students, taking a test and experiencing what that feels like, experiencing the sweat on your palms. You can hear the clock ticking and you can hear the students next to you erasing and all the kind of anxieties for some students that brings up. But it really gives you the best read on how you can perform in an environment like that. And you're so right about the full length tests. There are tests out there that are called so-called hybrid tests. Right. There are shortened versions of the SAT and the ACT, and sometimes they're just kind of mishmash them together. There are different ways of doing a shortened test. You can understand on the face of it, without really diving in too much, you can understand the appeal. It's like, oh, I can go in for an hour or 2 hours and it's going to come out and tell me a predictive test. There's some appeal to just getting in and doing it quickly. The problem with that is those results are not valid. And we've seen all kinds of issues with those hybrid tests because they really are cherry picking kind of the greatest hits from SAT and ACT and putting it together in an unscientific way. What I always tell parents is, look, I'm going to ask you to spend a little bit more time up front so you can save a whole heck of a lot of time down the road. When you take a full-length SAT, and then you turn right back around next weekend or the weekend after and take a full-length ACT, you have immediate data that you can point to. And we have follow-up conversations. I'm sure you do it as well, where you look at it. And again, you're triangulating based on score, possible score improvement, personal feelings, and it's all very real. And generally speaking, we come out of there and students or parents have a really strong, clear feeling about which one's going to be best, and they know why they're making that choice. What that prevents down the road is this pinball effect. As you get into it, you might say, wow, ACT is coming up in June, July. Maybe we should pinball back to that and then shift to SAT, and then we'll go back. And by the time you're all done with the process, you've taken the SAT and the ACT 6-7 times, and you're exhausted. So this does help you stay on your plan, stay honest. It takes a little bit longer to get there up front, but man, it saves a whole heck of a lot of time and stress down the road.
Sure does. I agree 100% with that. Stuff, Michael. Hey, I do have a question about prep.
Okay.
Because that's something that you hear time and time again. Students go take this test, either of them for that matter, with zero prep whatsoever.
Yep.
And others spend hours and hours on free prep. Some of them benefit from the free prep and score excellent and do a phenomenal job with the free versions of prep. Others spend a little bit of money on maybe a workshop or a boot camp or something else that will provide a real fast kind of fire hydrant version of prep for them. And that might be like, 2 hours before the actual test takes place so they don't forget it. We know it's not that soon, but we also know that it's typically really close to a test administration. And then we have those that spend, and invest their dollars into one-on-one prep for students. What's your take? What should students do? Should they go one direction or the other? Is there a benefit one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, this is where you really get into kind of individual student preference and personalities and things like that. When we sit down and we have conversations with families, it's a very holistic process, and it's a process that families have. An equal partner at the table. It's really about, first of all, understanding how much time you have until test day. Do you have 3-4 months to prepare, or is the test right around the corner? That's going to dictate what your plan is going to look like. What setting do you feel comfortable with? Now at Summit, we do have classroom programs that run throughout the academic year and throughout the summer. And those options are there. They're lower cost options. I have had many families who've said to me, you know what? My kid actually learns better in a class with their peers because the peers will kind of challenge my son to not hide in the back of the room. And so that's an important choice. We don't really do the boot camp style here at Summit. That's not something, that we really ascribe to, the kind of, quick and dirty, get in, get out, get results. I know that there are some folks that do it. That's just not the way we kind of do things. On the other end of the spectrum, though, there's that one-on-one in-home prep, whether it's online or in a physical location like yours, where you're coming in and you're working with someone online. On average, one-on-one tutoring is going to get you the best results because of a couple of different things. One, it's all customized to your individual needs. And you're going to have a tutor who's really been selected specifically to meet those needs. Maybe you need some more help on math. Well, guess what? We're going to bring in a math expert who's going to really attack those areas in need of opportunity for you. Maybe it's some other area. Maybe you just need help with confidence building. The best way to do that in many cases is to have a one-on-one environment where the tutor is really building up the students' confidence and helping them see, wow, I can do this. I'm not dumb. I do know this. So many families do choose one-on-one. It's the most comprehensive. It's the most personalized. That's why it tends to be more effective. But of course, you do have students out there who say, look, I'm self-motivated. I can do this on my own. I'll be fine doing some online thing, and I'm going to be okay. And I'm sure they can. It's all about knowing who you are and what's going to benefit you the most. And the analogy that I use that I really think holds up is this idea of having a personal trainer versus going out and getting maybe a workout video or doing some kind of online thing. Look, there are all kinds of different options out there for you to get fit and stay fit. You can get the DVD, you can subscribe to some videos or something, and that's great. But many people feel like, you know what, I need to have that gym membership. I need to have that personal trainer, because if I don't do it, Thursday night's going to roll around and I'm going to be sitting on the couch with some ding dongs watching Netflix. And it's really important for me to kind of have that discipline. And I think that's one of the things that one-on-one tutoring provides. You can absolutely create your own training regimen and you'll get really fit that way, but can you stay with it? So that's kind of the way I look at it. Obviously I do one-on-one tutoring. That's what we do here. We've seen the benefits of it. And so we tend to see more families make that choice.
It's good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you so much, Michael. We've come to the end of our time together, unfortunately, but I do want to give you an opportunity to kind of share with our viewers a little bit more in depth about what Summit Educational Group is all about and what type of services and programs you actually offer for families and how they could contact you. I know that it sounds kind of strange because we do test prep right here in Peachtree City at Capstone. For me to kind of give you the floor of opportunity here, but we're all in this together, and and there's so many students out there that need assistance, and so options are always a great thing.
Well, you're absolutely right about that.
Here's a little bit more about Summit.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's one situation that kind of highlighted for us that we're all in this together, it's this situation, right, where we kind of can see it firsthand. I really appreciate you inviting me to be on here this evening. It was fun for me. It's good to talk to you, and I hope everyone out there is safe and doing well. Again, Summit Educational Group, we are a tutoring company that's located in the Northeast. We work with thousands of students every year inside and outside of our footprint in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York. But we're not exclusive to the Northeast. We do have many students. In fact, all students now are doing online tutoring, but many students are coming to us from all over the country to work for us. Our specialty really is that one-on-one in-home experience, whether it's delivered right there in the living room or via online. We do tutoring via Zoom. We've been doing this for 30 plus years. We've got a great track record, SAT, ACT. We do academic tutoring. As I mentioned, we're doing online practice tests as well. We just launched a couple of new tools where students can self-time through a timer on our website. You can sign up for Zoom proctoring, so you get a live human being that's doing it. And one other thing that I'll point out, if you go to our website, we do have a COVID testing recommendations and updates page that's on there. You can go check out and kind of see the latest announcements for what's happening in the world of testing related to COVID-19. So that's a resource that I think many folks might find very helpful. We have a blog that's up there that talks about these issues. Our website is www.mytutor.com. If folks want to reach me, they're certainly welcome to do it. I'd love to talk to anybody. My email address is mdean, M-D-E-A-N, @mytutor.com. But really, what I hope for this evening, for anyone who's watching today or after the fact, I just hope that folks came away with some good information and hopefully maybe felt a little bit less anxiety about what's happening.
Oh man, I think I actually learned a few things. So I think we accomplished much here, Michael. I do appreciate your time. As everyone may know, again, my name is Mark Cruver. I'm with Capstone Educational Consultants located here in Peachtree City, Georgia. And if any of our viewers are in the local area and are looking for a conversation in person or by Zoom, if we need to do that, about testing strategies and a plan, to establish a plan, we are more than happy to have that conversation and get you pointed in the right direction, whether it's here locally or online elsewhere. We'd love to be a part of your journey. We thank you for joining us tonight on our second live event on Facebook. Join us each Wednesday night at 7 p.m. right here. We'll be having a variety of topics across the next several weeks. And we'll be talking a lot about the college journey and having conversations about it. So come back and see us next week. Michael, we thank you so much. We wish you all the best, and stay safe and keep your family safe as well. So thank you again.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a great evening. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.